sound. We'll get the live stream started and we'll get going.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so whenever we go home.
Yeah, you just wrote.
Okay, I'd like to welcome you to Convocation this week. This is our 12th and final presentation of the semester, and for a lot of you, this is probably only the second time you've been able to come in person. So thank you. I'll just say at the outset for your flexibility and goodwill during this COVID semester. We are very happy to have Dustin Hansen with us today, and I'll introduce him in just a minute. But I do also want to welcome those of you who are watching online, and just remind everyone in this room, for every one of you, there's 5 people online right now watching as well. And so we welcome you and hope that you'll post questions on the chats, and we'll try to use those during the Q&A. For those of you taking the class, just a reminder of the other assignments other than attendance you need to complete to pass the class. There are 3 cultural events to complete. There's a list online of those. Some of them are live, like going through an art gallery that you can do in a socially distant way. There's a lot of online options as well. If you haven't met me, that's one of my goals every semester, is to meet every student at least once, and so contact me. I've been in touch with you. And the final thing that everyone would need to know is there is no final exam in this class. You won't have to memorize a fact from week 2 and repeat that, but there is a final survey. And the survey just asks you to reflect on what you've learned this semester. That survey will open this afternoon, and you can complete it at any point during the rest of the semester. It will be due by the 17th. Again, there's no need to study for the survey. Just go in and give a thoughtful response. And of course, if you have any questions, let me know. Following today, I'll just be in touch with you via email, trying to make sure that we get everyone passing the class. The other thing I want to do here in this introduction is just to give you a sense of the presenter we have here with us today. And I'm just so grateful for Dustin to be here. He's presented at least one other time, maybe more than that. But he keeps doing this just amazing work, and I love to hear about it. So, as a young boy, Dustin could often be found riding his Makaha longboard on the smooth sidewalks of the Snow College campus, while his parents worked with pirates, storytellers, and singing minstrels. They were faculty members here at Snow in the Fine Arts Division. Dustin excelled at art at a young age, winning grand prize at the Springville Annual High School Art Show and Regional Sterling Scholar winner for visual arts. He attended Snow College, where he enjoyed spending time in the music department, but his true love was always in art. And he spent countless hours in the Snow College Art Barn, a drafty yet homey building that more than earned its unique name. Where was the Art Barn? So he said it's right where the Lorenzo Snow sculpture is, in that plaza was where the art department worked out of the appropriately named barn. After finishing school at SUU, Dustin entered the video game industry in 1994, where he created art for early PC and Nintendo games, 1 pixel at a time. Over the next 25 years, Dustin pioneered visual art and storytelling in video games, working with some of the biggest studios in the industry on titles like Madden, NFL Street, The Sims, and many more. And in 2014, Dustin dragged his family to Rhode Island, where he became director of new products for Hasbro. But his family missed the quiet hills of Ephraim, and they returned a year later. Dustin published his first book, Game On. It's a video game history book, in 2016, and he has an illustrated children's series called Microsaurs. Most recently, DC Comics published his book, My Video Game Ate My Homework. And he'll be talking about that today. Dustin is fortunate to work full-time as a writer and illustrator in his studio loft in Ephraim. He's an avid Utah Jazz fan, reality TV junkie, and of course he's a verified comic book nerd. So please join me in welcoming Dustin Hansen to the stage.
Thanks, David. All right, can you hear me? I'm loud, but I don't know if I need the microphone on or anything. Thank you. That was really, really nice to hear it. It's funny because I think I wrote that bio 100 years ago, and it sounds way more academic than I really am. I did go to Snow College in 1988, clear until 1992. And if you're wondering, there was no four-year program at that time. I was just really bad at one thing, and I was graduating. Horrible at it. Like, oh my gosh. And there were real legitimate reasons, but that I had other things that were kind of playing with me. And maybe some of you have some of these kind of things going on in your mind, where the honest truth is, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I do know I want to take off my mask, though. And one thing I also didn't anticipate is that, I'm like bald, and so I don't have to comb my hair, but now that I wear a mask, I have to comb my beard. So it's this opposite thing where instead of having beard or bed head, I have mask face, which can look pretty unruly. I loved learning. That is the real truth. I think if there's anything that I would kind of classify myself as, is a philosopher, which might sound weird being that I make toys and video games. But the idea behind philosophy is you have a love of learning. That's all it is, and that's really what it was. And I really found a home here at Snow College because of that. And part of that was it was cheap, and part of it was that I knew a lot of the professors because I grew up here. But I think the real reason is that I felt like I wasn't too worried to fail, which is going to be bad advice. Don't fail. But I'm very good at it. And while I was going to Snow College, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I do remember distinctly taking a walk with my mom and my sister. They used to walk a lot, just kind of to talk, and I kind of snuck in on one of their walks. And they were talking about what my sister was going to do with her life. She's a phenomenal flute player. She had an incredible scholarship at a big school to go play, to study. And I didn't have any of that. And somehow, no one asked me what I wanted to be, but I just blurted out, I think I want to be a lawyer. And I remember my mom literally laughing at me. I know she's not watching this live stream, I guarantee it, so I can say what I want. And I remember how that hurt, right? That concept of that, which is pretty funny because you would think in general, most parents hearing their son say, I want to be a lawyer, is a lot more comforting than where my track was going, where I wanted to be a starving artist, right? You'd think that she'd be happy with that. But I think she kind of knew that was probably not right for me, and turns out it wasn't. I decided to prove her wrong and take some classes in college the very first semester that would head me down that track, and realized it wasn't for me really quickly. I thought maybe I wanted to be a musician. I love to sing. I won't do it today. I thought maybe that's where I wanted to be. So I played around the music department, and both my parents were involved with the music department. That wasn't for me. And thought maybe I'd be an educator. Tried that for a while. I made it to a point where I actually went and did some student teaching at an elementary school and realized I'm terrified of people this tall. Like, terrified. My wife is a first grade teacher. I have no idea how she does it. They're adorable and they're cute, but when they all ask you questions at the same time, my brain doesn't process that. So education wasn't going to work for me. And it took me a long time to realize that I'm none of those things. But a part of me still lives in all of those camps. Right? I thought about being a historian. I love history because history is just storytelling. My last attempt at Snow College was to say I wanted to be an artist. And that stuck for a while, right? And yes, I'm an artist. That's what I do by trade. I draw a lot. However, that's not really what I am. And it took me a long time to realize that I wasn't an artist, I was a storyteller. And that distinction is interesting. Like when you tell someone you're going to be a starving artist, there's this implied pity. And people are like, oh, that's so cute. Like, what do you do for your job? Like, you're an artist? How adorable. Do you work somewhere? Yeah. But when you tell someone you want to be a storyteller, there's no cliche. There's not the starving artist cliche. Tell them a storyteller. Like, you'll lose friends you didn't recognize you even had in the first place. Because what do you do as a storyteller? What's your job? So a lot of that was kind of internal conflict that I had to deal with. And I'm going to talk a lot about internal and external conflict because they're such an important tool for storytelling, but they're also an important tool for people to decide who they want to be. And it's such a tough thing to figure out, to carve that niche. And I'll be honest, I've been basically a storyteller for the last 30 years, and I'm still not sure what I want to be. So maybe that's just me with that love of learning thing. And I had a PowerPoint, I really did, and I sent it to David, so Dr. Allred, sorry, about 15 minutes before then. And then I realized that my wife had my laptop, so I just brought props. Is that all right? All right, so before I get into that, can I tell you a story? That's what I do, right? Storytelling. So, climb in the time machine, okay? And you guys know I'm a video game guy, or at least if you don't, you do now. I've been making video games for a long time. If you climb in the time machine, we're going to go way back past, I don't know, what was your first console? Probably the GameCube. Right? You guys are young. Go way back, past that. Past the PlayStation 1, right? Past the Atari 2600. Way past the PDP-10, which none of you know what that is. Even though the first one I ever used was in that library that's still there. Big, massive, huge computer. Way back then, thousands of years. Actually, let's go back like to 30,000 years ago. It was the first time we have a recorded history of storytelling, right? And it actually happened completely by chance. Some bizarre geographical things happened, or geological things happened that allowed us to keep that record. And it's a place in France called Lascaux. If you want to see something just absolutely stunning, search Lascaux, France. I don't care if you do it on your phone while we're talking, that's totally great with me. Because that imagery helps. So 30,000 years ago, some hunters were telling a story, and they painted big bowls on the wall. They painted multiple hunters. There's a lot of just their hands that they had spit around, right? So you can see the size of their hands. And this became a first recorded history. And it actually took technology, and I know you're going to think this is weird to think this is technology, but it is, to capture and record that moment in time. And the reason being is that the pigments that they used yellow ochre, which is we still use it today. Artists still paint with a color called yellow ochre. And they used another thing called raw sienna, and they used charcoal, right? Still tools we use today as artists. And they use those tools, but they're not permanent at all. Like, they wear out fast. And the reason that we have it today is because there was an earthquake. And that earthquake shut off that cave. Not just shut it off a little bit. Like, oxygen did not exist. Well, okay, it existed. It did not move. There was no wind. There was nothing, right? So we just got lucky. So we have to take a gap from 30,000 years to, believe it or not, 3,500 years ago. That's a big gap of time, right? That we have very, very, very recorded literature. And I will make the case, those drawings on the walls of Lascaux, France, they are art. They're definitely art, but they're also literature. Right? They're a recorded history of what we've done. So if we go forward, the next big technological leap that let us keep these things was fire, right? And I know fire was around before, 30,000 years ago, right? But when we learned that if you took clay, you smashed clay, put it in a fire, it would turn it hard, right? So there was a form of language called Cuneiform, which I'm sure you've heard of. Cuneiform is interesting because it's just little pressed marks into clay tablets. And the majority of what we think, because we don't really know, that was recording crop rotation. Right? It actually became really important historically. It became important from an anthropological thing, right? So we could understand kind of how people grew and how things happened. But the interesting thing there is that only a few people knew how to read that cuneiform. probably the highly educated, probably rulers, people who were appointed, were taught how to read and produce cuneiform. Cuneiform is still around. Like we have some really great examples of it, but none of us can read it in this room, right? The only people who can read it, once again, are the highly educated, the people who have spent their lives trying to learn how to read this stuff. But we're going to go forward a little bit more, and it wasn't even that far, about another 500 years. We have another form of recorded history, and that's papyrus, right? Smashed reeds on the banks of the Nile. And those actually held up pretty well. We have some pretty good stuff. And you can imagine if you were the kid who was carrying last year's technology, the tablets on your back walking to school, and everybody else has the new technology of papyrus in their backpack, and they're like, sucker, that's heavy, right? Like that was kind of a neat thing. But the thing what that really did, what papyrus did, is it made the technology to create this stuff easier, and it made it so it was easier to share, which was huge because it starts to increase literacy. Right? That's an important part of what technology does. So yes, smashing reeds is technology. And that reed smashing technology actually continued for a long time. And we have a lot of recorded history from 3,500 years ago. Everything from hieroglyphics that are painted on walls and scratched and carved into walls that help with that history. The next big push was pulp, right? Being able to make paper. So now the cost goes down. And now instead of being able to produce a little bit of paper, you can produce paper in mass amounts. So paper technology became a huge part of our storytelling history. That was an interesting thing because about that same time in China, it was happening, so the papyrus was happening in Africa. In China, they were learning how to do woodcut prints. Right? So they have paper, they have wood, they can carve that in there, they reverse out, write backwards their language. There's a whole interesting history with kanji and being flipped. You should, fascinating. Could be a whole topic. But then they were able to print books, multiple books. Instead of having to write it once, now you can print a lot of copies. Move it forward. Again, we're going to really skip. Again, the printing press, newspaper, newsprint, right? So now with the printing press, somebody can write a story on Friday, and we can print it out and share it with hundreds of people on a Saturday. That's a huge step forward in technology. But I want you to think of this as a literacy thing, right? Can you kind of see where this is going, right? More and more people are available to read. That's an amazing thing. It really has changed everything. It's changed how long we live. It's changed everything. So if we take that further, after the printing press, and we have bookbinding, right? And the crazy thing is, books that are written today are still using those same technologies to an extent. You know, you can actually read a book written in Shakespeare's time in the exact same format, and it works fine, right? You can read a book written back then, compare it to new current books, basically the same. So radio came next, right? Now somebody could broadcast to thousands of people. Now reading is not even a part of literacy. So now people who don't have any education have an opportunity to read. Wonderful thing. And 1920s, right? Not that long ago, 100 years ago, movies popped on the scene. And now, you don't even have to use your imagination. Now, something stands in the front, it blasts into your eyeballs, you eat popcorn, and you passively receive information. Huge. That's massive. And I've often heard from so many people, where is it going to go next? Have we done everything? Because you can make the comparison that books 500 years ago are still made in the same process that books are today. You can make the comparison that the first Shakespeare plays that were performed on a stage are really no different than a movie. Right? Make those comparisons. One of the things that's really changed this is video games. And I can talk about this for way too long. But I want you to kind of think about that concept of not only being able to passively receive entertainment, but being able to participate in that entertainment and how important that is. And not just you playing against the computer, but the potential of you playing against somebody to call them sus, right? And boot them out. Now you're playing with other people. So all of these things combined all go to that core of what literacy is and global literacy and how we're getting better at these things. We've almost hit a tipping point where we're starting to see some of those things fracture, which is a really interesting thing to start seeing, where now there's so much information that you can glean. News comes to you, right? You can get down into a certain pipeline and you can go and you're only getting news from one source. Right? It's a really interesting thing and can be very dangerous and can be good. The thing that I've really kind of started to see is that in the last 15 years, 20 years, 40 years, video games have really changed how we interact with media and how we interact with each other. That's the thing in my brain that drives me to most nuts, is how much potential there is for us to use games and interactive content in a way to really drive everything. Education, a great way to do social education, to be able to learn playing through these experiences, right? Things that we can't really reproduce in any other way. I brought props because I was going to show things that I've made and all this kinds of stuff. We can talk about that kind of stuff later. It's not that important. I will say that, yes, I have written books, and I love books. You know, instead of showing you PowerPoint, I can a book. It's a real thing. They're not all digital, believe that or not. But this is somebody else's book, and this is the one that kind of got me going on wanting to be a storyteller. So this is Understanding Comics by Scott Mccloud. It was written in 1993, the same year I got married. So it's really, really old, ancient. So the thing about this book, there's no way you're going to see this. Page 49, you're going to get it someday, is this one panel right here. I'll explain it to you because there's no way you can see it. This one panel right here changed the trajectory of my entire life. And it was this concept between defining the difference between perceived and received information. Information that we perceive, we look at it, we seek it out, and information that we receive, unintentional information that pours into our brains. And where is that delineation? Where do those things cross? One of the things that Scott suggests, and I can call him Scott because we're best friends, not really, but I've met him once. One of the things that Scott suggests is if you have a photograph of somebody, Tom Selleck. How many of any of you guys know who Tom Selleck is? The world's greatest mustache, right? Magnum PI. And you have a photograph of this guy, right? And you see that photograph, you look at it and go, that's Tom Selleck. So if we take that photograph and we have someone do an illustration of it, and they extract it and they abstract it a little bit, and maybe they highlight his mustache, make him look even a little more manly than he is, even though he's a very manly guy. You might still look at it and say, that's Tom Selleck, but it's also a man. If we extract that one time more, so it just kind of becomes an oval with a mustache, two eyes, maybe he's wearing the Detroit Tigers hat from the Magnum PI thing. You might know that it's Tom Selleck, but now you're really going to start thinking that's a man. I'm not sure who it is. And then if we extract it one more time, so it's a circle, two eyes, and a smiley face, not even a man any longer, right? It's a human. We can recognize that. And it represents a face. That's it. And if we go on the opposite side of that spectrum and we move to the word face, literally, just face. Right? Then we go to the next one and we talk the description, kind of the opposite. The 40-year-old man with a mustache and a blue hat. Then we go further, right? 40-year-old man, mustache, blue hat, famous TV star, extremely handsome. Then you go further and you say Tom Selleck starred in Magnum PI in 1983, he blah, 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 right? So we have this interesting kind of list that happens. And what we really find out is the closer we get to the center of that, the more you participate as the viewer in identifying what that is. So in 1993, Scott Mccloud made the assumption, or made the guess, that eventually we would move to a form of language that only contains that center part. Only has that middle part. And the reason being is that it allows us to bring our own interpretation into what that communication is. It's an extremely brilliant process or thing to think of in 1990s But I'm sure most of you this week have sent an emoji to somebody, right? And that emoji, if you send, you might even have a private version of an emoji that you send to somebody that means something completely different than what that generic emoji means. When someone says the word face to you, if you're all picturing what a face is, science gets a little fuzzy here. Most people will see somebody else's face, not their own. Some people will see their own. Most people see a parent or a very, very important person to them. But they don't see Tom Selleck. So that center part of communication has become a really, really important thing to kind of focus on as far as storytelling goes. And we see it happening in video games probably more than any place else. And I see it in comic books a bit too. You think of Charlie Brown, for example. About as close to emojis as you can possibly get. To a point where the only way someone can cosplay Charlie Brown himself is to really wear the shirt. Right? Yellow, black, zigzag, Charlie Brown. Because I could be Charlie Brown in my face. Like, okay, maybe not. But I think you kind of get the idea. Let me grab some water. Sorry. So when I kind of think, when I can create something on my own, the comic books, the reason I love them is because I'm able to create that completely on my own. When I work on a video game project, I'm working with, tens or maybe hundreds of people. But the comic books allows me to really express that concept a little bit more autonomously. And it's not entirely fair. Because, if I work with DC, for example, obviously I have editors and people like that that are really super helpful, and it's a huge part of the process. But there's some reality to that, which allows me to really kind of make something generic that can connect with you as a reader, that will allow you to say, maybe I can be that person. Maybe that's me. And maybe it can feel kind of intentional. And when we talk about art doing that, that's one thing. We talk about writing doing that. It's something entirely different. Because you can imagine having a book that says, person one walks into the room and talks to person two, and having people filter. Like, we don't do that with language. Language is very specific. But art is very interpretive. And it ends up being one of those things where the more you can put into it, the better you feel connected to those things. And I'm sure if you guys are thinking back to books that you've read, or to stories that you've read, or video games that you've played, and you've internalized those, you have your own visual interpretation of what those things are. I kind of think that's why some people say the book's better than the movie, even though, boy, do I hate that argument. They're such different mediums, it's kind of impossible to compare the two. But I think that is part of it, right? Is that sometimes when we get a visual representation of things that we love, it replaces our own personal interpretation into that. I'm going to leave enough time that we can kind of chat about a few questions. I'm hoping you guys will have stuff. There's like a few of you here, but I'm hoping maybe some people out here online will be able to ask some questions too. I want to talk about one more thing, and the importance of how we get an acquired taste. Right? You guys have heard that cliche, right? It's an acquired taste. And usually we refer to it as food, right? And I think part of that is just that sense thing, right? Yeah, you taste something, and sometimes you'll try something that is extremely strong, and you might not like it initially. The first time I tried sushi, I didn't like it. And I love sushi. And the first time I tried coffee, I didn't like it. And I like coffee. But the question is, how did I get there? How did I get to that point where I like something different than my normal diet? And it's a really important thing to kind of dig into. So I'm going to try to tell this fast, and then we're going to talk about where that hits as far as what you consume. And I don't just mean food, right? So when I first tried, I'll use coffee as an example. Right? When someone first tries coffee, especially black coffee, it's one of those things that's a really polarizing thing. Some people try it the first time and they love it. Most people try it and think it's bitter. My wife still says it tastes like sticks. Right? Probably fair. Right? Because guess what it is? Ground up sticks, beans, right? Dried beans. So how did I get to that point where I liked it? Well, I'm sure the first time I tried coffee, it had sugar in it, and it had cream in it, which are two things that I like. I mean, look at me. I have a Mountain Dew in my briefcase. Like, I like sugar. So by adding some sugar and some cream and maybe some steamed milk, maybe a little cinnamon, all things that I love, it makes it so I can start to compare and contrast those flavors. And now adding bitter to that opens it up. It makes it more enticing. Got some different things. And the more I get used to that flavor, the more I might be interested in that thing that's outside of my normal purview. Maybe I start enjoying the bitter more, so I'll reduce some of those other things and pull those out until I can have the acquired taste, right? So you kind of get the idea, right? So one thing that I'm really seeing a lot of in this, especially this, current culture that we're going through, right? The Black Lives Matter movement is a great example of this. Is that sometimes when you hear those things, they can be really polarizing. And they can put you to a point where maybe you're not willing to say those things, right? Maybe you're not willing to make that leap. However, if you're consuming the right media, if you're getting information in and allowing yourself to start filtering that into your tastes, we start to begin to grow some empathy, and we start to begin to understand other perspectives. And so to me, when we have something like video games that star characters who aren't the normal video game characters, Last of Us 2, which is one I finished this year, right? I played as a 20-year-old lesbian. That's not me. I am not 20. I'm not a lesbian. Right? I also played as a 25-year-old muscle-bound hulk of a woman. Right? Those are so far from my normal consumption that I was able to kind of, it was awkward at first for me to make that difference. When I started to kind of see what they were trying to tell me as a storyteller, how I can empathize and try to understand what those people are going through, it became really enlightening to me. And ended up being one of my favorite games of all time. And I know a lot of people, boy, there's probably, if anything is going to light up the chat room, it's me saying that Last of Us 2 is a great game. Lots of people hated that game. But I think part of it is that it was the acquired taste thing. So if I'm going to, and I will stop here, and I didn't even show my props. One of the things that I would say is, while you're here at Snow College, and while you're, in between, try to find something out of your normal taste zone and see how it tastes, out of your normal flavor zone. Try something new. Read something you wouldn't read. Play a game you would never play. Read a comic book if you're not a comic book person. Because I think it'll help you to broaden your horizons. And I think, if anything, if college is for anything, it's that. And if you're a biology major and you love biology and it's the most important thing to you, I promise you'll learn more about biology by taking a music class than you will about taking biology. You might not think I'm right, but I have seen that firsthand with so many people. So broaden your horizons. It'll make you a better storyteller. It'll make you a better communicator and all those things. All right, I know I didn't talk about things. I will be happy to answer questions about games that I've made. I know that's usually a question. Or about working with DC or Hasbro or whatever those things. But I'm really hoping that if I can leave with anything, is like you've got to broaden your horizons. You have to be able to open up. Look for those acquired taste opportunities. I think they're there everywhere, across every gamut. And Transformers meets G.I. Joe. Like, this hits nobody's tastes, right? Like, if you love G.I. Joe and you love Transformers, the idea of putting them together is kind of abysmal, but it's the most successful thing I've ever worked on in my entire life. Well, toys life. So, be broad. Okay. I used a prop. I used two. I combed my beard. So, all right. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks.
Time for some questions. And we invite questions from online as well.
Ooh, favorite DC hero? I really hate to go with the cliche here. But probably Superman. And part of that is just historical, right? So one thing I didn't mention is I'm dyslexic, like severely dyslexic. So school was extremely hard for me. So when I mentioned like Stowe College took me 4 years, that was a huge part of it. But when I was in the 3rd grade and sitting in the remedial reading room with people, even though I loved stories so much and I could see this stuff, trying to figure out why my brain couldn't get words, the first thing I remember was comic books. It was the first thing that kind of pushed me into that reading thing. So I grew up here in Ephraim. The only place you could buy comic books was Anderson Drug, which is the Hispanic market now, across from the bank down there. And the only 2 comic books they had on the comic book shelf were DuckTales. It was a Scrooge McDuck version of DuckTales. And they had a Superman comic. I had 11 cents. I'll remember this. Like, you know, you have those memories that stick. I had 11 cents. The DuckTales comic book was 25 cents. The Superman comic book was 75 cents. The guy at Anderson Drug gave me the DuckTales thing for 11 cents. So it was like the first comic book I ever had. I went home, read it, absolutely loved it. My parents could see that. It was like, oh my gosh, you read something? So they went down and bought the Superman book. So that's where, you know, there's some nostalgia there, obviously.
Could you say a little bit more about comic books and your dyslexia and your new book?
Yeah, for sure. This new book that I did with DC is My Video Game Ain't My Homework, which, you know, the way I got that idea was an interesting thing. Ideas are kind of weird. But the thing that really hit me with that one was I wanted an opportunity to show a kid who was a builder who struggled with school, right? Like, and dyslexia is his thing too, the main character, Dewey Jenkins. His approach to how he reads is very similar to mine. So I'll tell you one really quick thing about dyslexia. Here's the dispelling the myth of dyslexia. So dyslexia isn't when I read things, all the words shift around, even though that's the easiest way to describe it. What dyslexia is, my eyes work just as well as yours, right? A lot of dyslexics are excellent artists, right? My eyes work fine. It's my brain that doesn't kind of connect those things. And so when I see things like the letter CH, I don't see CH. I either see chalk or cheek. That's usually what I see. So the word has to separate to fit that word in there. So if I have a trigger word for me, like chicken is a great trigger word for me because it has a CH, it has a K. K is really tough for me because sometimes I see K as jock, J-O-C-K. Sometimes I see it as kick, K-I-C-K. So sometimes the K will be like on either side, right? And then the EN verb is another one too, because EN to me doesn't fall at the end of a word. It should fit at the beginning, like energy. So when I see the word chicken, it's scrambled. So I wanted to be able to kind of explain that in the book that I had with Dewey, but I didn't want to get into those details. I wanted to get into the social details of why that hurts, why people see him different. Even his twin sister can't understand it. Can't I just read it for you, right? And that's really, you have no many ideas how many times I've heard that. Let me read that to you. No, like I can read. It just takes me a really long time, right? So I wanted to get that kind of concept across. And it was really fun. DC was fantastic because they allowed me to play with some color contrast things, which color contrast actually has an impact on how I read. White text or black text on a white background is tough for me. And most of it's eye fatigue. So reading something that's tan, dark brown on tan is a lot better for me if I'm going to read something an extended period of time. So they let me do some things like have non-white text bubbles and tan text and some things like that, or dark brown text. So they were a fantastic partner because they wanted me to be able to tell that story. And of all the people, like I hear from kids mostly, right? Well, it's written for like a 2nd or 3rd grade level, reading level. I hear from the kids a lot. The ones obviously that I'm hearing from the most are kids with reading disabilities that are like, I get it. Like, this is so cool. This is exactly what I'm going through. And that's why I wrote that book, is to feel that connection. And so I'm really happy with.
We have a question from the online chat. The question was, how did your personal experiences influence the book?
My book? Yeah, we kind of talked a little bit about that one a little bit, but I'll show you some of the stuff from my new book, right? It's kind of an interesting thing. So I will show more props. So my new book, look, here's the cover from my new book. There's no way you can see it. My new book, I'm actually doing traditional. I normally do digital artwork, but this one I'm doing in watercolor. It's about a boy named named Loyal, who is going through just an impossible thing, which is he's watching somebody who he loves dearly die. Right? For kids, you know. So this book is sometimes when reality becomes impossible, and I mean, you guys have been there, right? There are things like right now, for crying out loud, like what you're going through is impossible, right? Just the whole COVID mess and everything else involved with it. Sometimes the impossible has to become reality after that. So, Loyal, the boy there, at the age of like 11 or 12, kind of conjures up an imaginary dog that he can't explain, but he knows it's real. And it's him kind of trying to say, is it okay to accept the fact that I'm going through a little bit of psychosis? That's what the book's about, right? Once again, for kids. And I've dealt with that, right? For me, like when I was young, when I was going to school in second, third grade, that concept of being the dumb kid was huge for me. And when you live in rural areas, rural schools, you guys know, right? Kids aren't really nice to the dumb kid. And junior high was level 10 of that. Right? Like junior high kids aren't nice to each other when they're all exactly the same. If you have somebody who's different, they don't go with that. So I did go through some of this stuff. I didn't have an imaginary dog. It's even weirder. But this was a good way for me to kind of tangibly share that experience. And I did have the death of somebody very, very important to me. And I felt that continued visitation when she was going through her last few throes of death, right? It was really tough. And so I was always grateful for that opportunity that I had of some form of escapism. So yeah, now you know I'm completely crazy, but it's something I think a lot of us have dealt with. Yeah, I really do think having personal experiences feed into your storytelling is really important.
I think we have another one from online, and then maybe we'll go to one in person.
What would your advice be to a young writer who is trying to get their start as an author?
Oh, it's so good. It's literally my favorite question, right? Part of it is that acquired taste thing. Read everything. Consume everything. There's been a lot of talk this year about the literary canon, especially in high school literature. Right? It's a big discussion. And part of that is saying, should we be reading The Hate You Gave by Angie Thomas instead of reading To Kill a Mockingbird? Right? It's a very good question. Right? And there are pros and cons to both. I know where I sit. I think The Hate You Gave is one of the best books I've read in the last 10 years. So part of that, you know, this kind of like redefining the canon is an interesting thing. But I would take that even further. If you're a writer, if you want to be a writer, and the only thing you're consuming is books, you're absolutely missing the market. You should be consuming TikTok. There's some phenomenal stories happening there. You should be watching television. You should be watching movies. You should be playing video games. You should be doing all of these different forms of media, and you should be taking notes. Copious filing cabinets full of notes on both what works and what doesn't. That to me is the thing that will turn you into a writer, is consuming, and not just consuming, but consuming and digesting that information. So that's the one I would say, in any form.
We have a question in person.
So I've been showing some dyslexia symptoms due to recent brain damage. would you have any tips or tricks that helped you get through college with it?
Oh, yeah. Well, to me, the biggest thing is you have to find the network that understands you. That's the biggest thing. And it is actually very common after traumatic brain injury to start experiencing dyslexia, right? Or dysgraphia is even, I don't know if do you have number questions too? Like, does numbers kind of do similar things? So the biggest thing is finding that network that can help and knowing when it's okay to say, like, this isn't working for me. I either need more time or I need someone that can help me with it. Another way to get that information into your brain. And the good thing is, like, when I went to school in the 1970s and 80s, there wasn't those systems there to help. And if you can reach out, you can get it on an IEP or an individual education plan, something that will give you an opportunity to have the extra time you need and recognize that it is a straight up disability. There's nothing wrong. It's not you, right? There's nothing that you did wrong. There's nothing that's wrong with your brain. It's just a disability, like everything else. Unfortunately, it's an invisible disability, right? If you come in and you've had another accident, horrible thing, you lose a leg and you've got a prosthetic, right? That's a very visible disability. Sometimes these invisible ones are tough to manage, because you can't always manifest as just being the slowest reader, right? Because people might think of that differently. So I think openly communicating it is a huge part of it. And then finding that network of people that can help you get through that. For me, it really was comics. I went to a teacher in high school and said, I just can't read very well. Can I read the cliff notes of these books? And she was great. She said, absolutely, let's do that, but I'm going to expect more from you on the other end, right? So, finding that network that can kind of help you get through those things are the big thing. And recognizing it's not you. It's just part of who you are.
We'll do another online question.
This person said, what's your game of the year?
Oh. That's so tough. It probably is Last of Us 2. Hades is also another one that is phenomenal. The thing about Hades is that they tell story in the most non-traditional way I have ever seen a story told. That one ranks way up there. It's between those two, I think. Yeah, I haven't even played Animal Crossing. Sorry. I watch everybody play it. Yeah, probably the one of those two.
Do we have any more in person or online? We'll have. This is going to be our last question then.
Will my mild to severe Tourette's prevent me from writing at a professional level?
Heck no. Absolutely not. If you would have told me when I was in high school that I'd be writing books, video game history books for one of the biggest publishers in the world, I would have told you you're crazy. There is no way I thought that would be in my pipeline. But, there is always a way to make those things work. If you're a storyteller, you have to get that story out. There are non-traditional ways to write. There are non-traditional ways to read. There are so many great tools that can kind of help you get there. So absolutely not. I'm going to say one last thing, because I know we're getting close. It's the best advice I've ever had in my life. So, admission time. I suck at selling books. I'm horrible at it. To a point where, I wrote a whole series. I brought them here so I could say, I wrote the Game On book, and it's great. I love it. It's done really well. It sells itself. That's great. Right? I don't have to sell that book. I wrote another series called The Microsource that I'm really proud of that nobody knows about. Nobody. It's like the greatest kept secret, right? The only people who know about it are the 200 kids that go to Ephraim Elementary. I'm just terrible at it. I love to write and I love to tell stories. I hate selling my own work. So consequently, that's come at the failure, right? Financial failure, right? I'm not a really successful writer. So it's caused me to question myself a lot. caused me to question why I do this whole crazy thing. Because I can go and consult with a video game group for a month and make more money than I can make in a year writing books. Like, so why do I write books? Just banged my head against this forever, and it is my biggest internal conflict. I know I said I'd talk about that, but I went in a different direction, sorry. It's my biggest thing inside that binds me down. So I talked to somebody who I trust dearly. She's an editor. I won't tell you what she's edited, but you'd be like, wow, we all read that book. I promise. Every one of you read these books. Great editor, super highly regarded. And I talked to her about kind of what I was struggling with. Like, why do I do this if there's no return? It's a fair question. And part of the reason I write was to get a modicum of fame, but the modicum of fame is only a metric that I can use to pay bills. And I say that with the most honesty I possibly can. I don't want to be famous. I want to be able to pay bills. She said, here's what I'm going to tell you. And I want you to listen the most carefully you can possibly listen. If you can quit writing, you absolutely should. That's my best advice. So, still writing. So, sometimes you have to do the things that you fail at. It is so important for your personal growth, or for whatever's inside of you, to just share those things that you can't not do. And if you find something like that, you are the luckiest person in the world, even though you might fail. So, fail spectacularly.